They laughed. The entire world pointed fingers, chuckling at Australia's seemingly insane decision. Imagine, if you will, a nation, desperate and audacious, deciding to take millions upon millions of freshwater crayfish, these shelled bottom dwellers, and move them, not to another river, not to a new lake, but to vast, parched, open fields. It sounded like the plot of a B-movie, a joke played on an unsuspecting public, but this was very real. And the mockery was immediate, global, and relentless. For years, Australia had been grappling with a silent crisis. Their inland waterways, once teeming with life, were struggling. Persistent droughts coupled with agricultural runoff had led to a boom and bust cycle for many aquatic species. Among them, the common yabby, a type of freshwater crayfish, was experiencing unprecedented population surges in some areas, while others faced ecological collapse. Wyatt, a veteran farmer whose family had worked the land for generations, remembered the good old days. The creeks used to sing, he'd often tell his granddaughter Hazel, now a budding environmental scientist. Now it's just a whisper, or sometimes a scream. Hazel, fresh out of university, was part of a controversial government initiative, a last-ditch effort to rebalance the ecosystem. The Yabby Relocation Project, as it was officially called, was her first major assignment, and it was already a global laughingstock. The idea was audacious, born from desperation and a radical theory. What if these abundant crayfish, known for their burrowing habits and omnivorous diet, could be repurposed? What if they weren't just aquatic creatures, but potential terraformers? The theory, championed by a small, dedicated team of ecologists, suggested that by introducing them into fallow agricultural fields, particularly those with clay-rich soils, the crayfish could aerate the soil, break up hardpans, and even enrich the land with their waste. It was a long shot, a gamble, but the alternatives were grim. Wyatt, initially skeptical, had agreed to let them use some of his drier, less productive fields. He watched bewildered as teams and specialized vehicles arrived, carefully transporting vast netted containers filled with squirming yabbies. The sight of millions of these creatures being released onto dry earth, digging furiously into the ground, was surreal. The news spread like wildfire. Headlines screamed, "Australia's crayfish folly, the Great Yabby Migration, a recipe for disaster?" Sarcastic memes flooded the internet. Experts from around the world weighed in, universally condemning the project as reckless, ecologically irresponsible, and a guaranteed failure. You can't just dump aquatic animals onto land and expect a miracle, one prominent European ecologist scoffed on a news program. It's an ecological catastrophe waiting to happen, or more likely a very expensive way to feed the local birds. Hazel felt the weight of the world's derision. Every day, she'd wake up to new articles, new criticisms. Even her own colleagues, privately, expressed doubts. "Are we really doing the right thing, Hazel?" her friend Nova had asked, looking out at a field pockmarked with fresh yabby burrows. "Or are we just creating a giant land-based yabby graveyard?" For the first few months, it seemed the critics were right. Thousands of crayfish perished, unable to find sufficient moisture or food, falling prey to birds and other opportunistic predators. The fields looked no different, perhaps even more desolate with the scattered shells. Wyatt walked his land, a grim expression on his face. He'd put his faith and a significant portion of his farm into this venture, and it looked like it was all for naught. The government faced immense pressure to halt the project, to admit defeat. But the small team, led by a stubbornly optimistic Aiden, persisted. They had chosen specific fields, areas that, while currently dry, had higher water tables or were prone to seasonal flooding. They installed special irrigation systems, not to flood the fields, but to provide just enough moisture to keep the topsoil workable for the burrowing yabbies, encouraging them to dig deeper to seek out the latent moisture. Then, slowly, imperceptible at first, things began to change. As the yabbies burrowed, they created intricate networks of tunnels, sometimes reaching depths of several meters. These tunnels acted like miniature pipelines, allowing rainwater to penetrate deeper into the compacted clay soil rather than simply running off. Wyatt noticed it first after a particularly heavy rain. The puddles, which usually sat for days, disappeared faster. The soil, which once as hard as concrete, felt different, looser, more absorbent. He took a handful and it crumbled in his fingers, something he hadn't seen in years. Hazel, meticulously monitoring soil samples, began to see the data shift. Organic matter content was rising. Nitrogen levels, boosted by the Abbey's natural waste, were improving. The soil structure was undergoing a remarkable transformation. The deeper burrows were creating microhabitats, attracting beneficial insects and even small amphibians. The fields, once barren, started to show signs of life. Patches of native grasses, long dormant, began to sprout with a vigor not seen in decades. The Abbeys themselves, having established their subterranean networks, were thriving. They weren't just surviving, they were flourishing, creating a unique, semi-aquatic ecosystem beneath the dry surface. The most astonishing discovery came a year later. Wyatt, planting a new experimental crop of drought-resistant wheat, found that the germination rates in the Abbey-treated fields were significantly higher than in his control plots. The plants were stronger, their roots able to penetrate the now softened soil with ease. The yield at harvest time was unprecedented for such dry conditions. It wasn't just Wyatt. Other farmers who had cautiously joined the project began reporting similar successes. The crayfish, once mocked as a nuisance, had become an unlikely ally. They were aerating the soil, improving water retention, and even providing a new, sustainable protein source as their populations grew. The world, which had once openly scoffed, now watched with a mixture of disbelief and awe. Scientific papers, initially dismissive, were now being rewritten with a sense of urgency. Ecologists who had predicted disaster were now scrambling to understand this unprecedented success. The very same news channels that had broadcast the global mockery were now featuring segments on Australia's ecological miracle. The regret was palpable. Regret for the hasty judgments, for the lack of faith, and for underestimating the ingenuity and resilience of both nature and human innovation. Hazel, standing in a field now vibrant with new growth, watched Wyatt harvest his crops. The air was filled with the hum of insects and the subtle scent of damp earth. "They called us crazy, didn't they, Grandpa?" she muttered, a proud smile on her face. Wyatt, wiping sweat from his brow, just nodded. "Sometimes, Hazel," he said, looking at the network of burrows visible in the freshly turned earth, "the biggest lessons come from the smallest creatures, and the loudest laughter often comes before the greatest revelations." Australia had taken a monumental risk, endured global ridicule, and in doing so had not only saved its land, but it also offered the world a profound lesson in ecological thinking and the extraordinary power of the unexpected. The Abbeys, once just freshwater crustaceans, had become the unlikely architects of a new, greener future.